Good evening, everybody. My name is Tom Giroux. I'm known as the Zoom guy at the Forest History Association of Wisconsin. I'll be helping to run our webinar tonight with my coworker, Don Schnitzler. Before we get started, I just wanted to do a little shameless promotion about the Forest History Association of Wisconsin. You can see our mission up on the screen. To inform, educate, archive, and publish. And so tonight, as part of our inform and educate programs that we operate, and the webinar is free to anybody who wants to watch it, and it will be posted to YouTube after this, so lots of people do look at it. But if you want to support our mission, by all means, go to our webpage, look up the membership, and it's $20 for an individual for a year, real deal, and you can contribute to our mission. So I'm going to turn it over to Don Schnitzler, who's going to talk a little bit about how the webinar will operate tonight, and then introduce our speaker.
Okay. My name is Don Schnitzler. I'm also a member of the Forest History Association of Wisconsin's Board of Directors. And I'm pleased tonight to welcome everyone on behalf of the organization to the webinar. Evening's talk is entitled The Mendota Dugout Canoes, Discovery, Recovery, and Ongoing Research. It's going to be presented by Dr. Jim Skibo. Dr. Skibo is the Wisconsin State Archaeologist with the Wisconsin Historical Society. He received his master's and PhD at the University of Arizona, and has worked in the Philippines, the American Southwest, and on the Great Lakes. Tonight, he's going to talk to us about a 1,200-year-old canoe discovered in Madison's Lake Mendota in 2021. Its recovery made worldwide news and was identified or selected as one of the top 10 archaeological discoveries of that year. In the fall of 2022, a 3,000-year-old canoe was found in the same location. It's the oldest canoe in the Great Lakes and the second oldest canoe found in North America. His presentation tonight recounts the discovery and recovery of the canoes and describes the ongoing research and collaboration with the Ho-Chunk Nation. Before turning the screen over to Dr. Skibo, a couple of housekeeping issues to help facilitate the webinar running smoothly. We're going to hold all questions till the end of the presentation, but if you come up with a question as Dr. Skibo is talking, you can just jot those down in the chat feature, and the chat feature is located near the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will hold all those questions, though, again, until the end. If you experience any technical issues, difficulties, as the presentation is going on, use that same chat feature to reach out to either Tom or I, and we will see what we can do to resolve the issue. And finally, the presentation, as Tom mentioned, is being recorded. We will have it up on our Forest History Association website and our YouTube channel by tomorrow morning. And with that, I'm pleased to turn the screen over to Dr. Skibo, and I look forward to hearing what he has to tell us about these wonderful canoes.
All right, thank you, Don, and thank you, Tom, for the invitation. It's a great organization you have, and I'm pleased to be able to chat with you today. You can see that okay, I hope. Let me just say a couple things about what the state archaeologist does. There's a state archaeologist in every state, and our primary responsibility is to preserve and protect and tell the stories about the cultural resources in our great state. And we have 36,000 sites, pre-contact and post-contact archaeological sites recorded in our database. So one of my important parts of my job is to keep that inventory and to work with partners that want to work and do archaeological work in the state. And another part of my job, since I was just hired a little over a year and a half ago, was to be a bit more out facing and to do more things engaged with the public. And it's these canoe stories that really have been a gift to help me reach that goal. So tonight I'm going to talk about, and some of you may have seen this presentation or parts of it before. We've done it a lot of times, but the interesting thing is there'll be something new tonight. And I think there'll be something new for quite some time, because this now has become an ongoing research project.
So Jim, we're seeing your slide and then the next slide. So if you could go to full screen some way.
Okay. I think I shared the wrong screen, perhaps. How's that?
Just give me a second here. Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I became the state archaeologist in July of 2021. And my staff, I supervised the maritime archaeology program, which at that time was Tamara Thompson, who's in the Diving Hall of Fame, and Caitlin Zant, who's since taken a job with NOAA, and we're in the process of replacing that position, and Amy Roseborough, the staff archaeologist who works closely with me. And so when was having these initial meetings, just learning about the job and getting to know everybody, Tammy kept bringing up that, you know, she had found a dugout canoe, at least what she thought was a dugout canoe in Lake Mendota. And Tammy dives every week of the year, through the ice, in caves, in all kinds of places, but mostly in Lake Michigan and Lake Superior, but mostly in Lake Michigan, because the Maritime Archaeology Program focuses on Wisconsin's rich maritime history and the hundreds of shipwrecks that went down in our Great Lakes. But she lives on Lake Mendota, which is in Madison, and she was doing some recreational diving with a friend, with these devices that propel you along. They call them scooters. It was in May when the water was clear. Typically, Lake Mendota's clarity is almost zero because of the algae bloom. But in the early spring and late fall or early winter, it does clear up. And so they were zooming along, picking up trash and chasing fish and just having fun. And then suddenly Tammy sees something sticking out of the water. And by happy coincidence, she and Cecil Schrader, prior to the pandemic, started a project on the statewide survey of all the known dugout canoes in Wisconsin. When they started the project, there was 11. And subsequently, they found over 70 dugout canoes. And so they've been going to historical societies and supper clubs and people's basements and recording all the known cases of dugout canoes. So she became familiar with what they look like. What she initially saw was a piece of wood coming out of the sediment on the bottom of the lake at about 27 feet. Because she's the curious type and a Hall of Fame diver, she brushed a little portion off and then followed the contours. And then this is actually a picture, if you could read that, I don't know, on your screen. She wrote dugout canoe on her in her notebook and showed it to the other diver and took a picture. They were nearly out of air, so they had to go back. Tammy did a good job of sort of remembering where they were. And also, I want to point out there was a set of stones also in the canoe. And so this was the picture they showed me then as I started work in July of 2021. Here's a better picture of the what we've later learned are net sinkers, and I'll talk about those in a minute. And so they showed me these pictures, and I said, well, that does look like a canoe. But lots of people make canoes. Hobbyists make dugout canoes. Boy Scouts make dugout canoes. And it would be unusual, or it would be miraculous, really, for really old wood to be preserved on the bottom of Lake Mendota. You know, driftwood will last a couple years, 5 years maybe, not anything that's quite that interesting. So I suggested we go back down and get a little piece of the dugout canoe. So I need about as a hair size piece of the canoe, and we'll do some radiocarbon dating. And I was surprised to find out when it came back a week later at AD 800. So it's an 800-year-old, it's a 1,200-year-old canoe, pardon me. And I was shocked. I didn't expect that. I expected to be in the 1950s or something. And so I immediately went out and talked to our director, Christian Overland. And he said he was also surprised by it. And I said that now that was exposed, it likely will, and close to the surface like that, it will likely degrade, and that it won't last very long. And he asked me what he suggests, and I said, well, we should contact our tribal partners and see what they think. And if they're in agreement, I think we should take it out. It's very significant. When we first found this would be the oldest nearly intact dugout canoe in Wisconsin. There was a small fragment of a canoe that was a couple hundred years older, but this was a significant find. So Christian agreed that we could bring it out, and especially after we talked to our tribal partners, and we picked 6 weeks. We had 6 weeks to come up with a plan, and Christian said, let's bring it up, but can you do it? And I said, sure. I mean, I'd never done anything like this. Neither had Tammy nor anyone anywhere had brought up a canoe from 27 feet down. Typically, when we find canoes, and they find them all over the world, really, it's because they had been cached in the fall. They had been in, waist deep water, purposely sunk in the fall, weighted down and buried to preserve and protect them through the winter. So when they're found today, they're found by people putting in their docks or people swimming on their shore. But this was in 27 feet of water, so it had a different story. And so we decided we had 6 weeks to bring it out. We practiced, we talked to other people. We had to build a vat to put it in for the preservation process. And it was an amazing 6 weeks. And here's a good picture of the simplest artifacts there are. And these are the net sinkers. These are about the size of your open hand, and they're notched. We know these artifacts from other, most of the Great Lakes, where they're used to weight down the bottom of a net, and the top of the net's being floated with gourds or something like that. So this was the only known canoe anywhere found with associated artifacts. And my thinking was that it might have had a net in this canoe when it was sunk, and the net has subsequently dissolved. Because we were unsure if there would be other artifacts associated with the canoe, about a week before we were going to pull it out, we had to remove the sediment. It was exposed, but it was really sort of embedded in this clay, and that we had to excavate it. But in the process of excavating, we said, let's see if there's any additional artifacts. And so we did something called dredging, where at the bottom of the lake are the divers, and they are with a vacuum system. They're sucking up the water and the sediment, and it's coming out, and we're screening it. We did this for several days, found no artifacts. And so the last day, we just did some excavation to remove to loosen the canoe. November 2nd, 2021, it was 29 degrees. There was ice on the dock. The reason we chose this day was because the water would be clear. And also we asked for the assistance of the Dane County dive team. And so that was the day that was available to them. So we picked November 2nd. So the way it was brought up, we constructed this sling that was, after the canoe was excavated, it actually was sort of buoyant. And so it was easy to lift it up gently and wrap it, the sling around the bottom, which had handles. And to these handles, these yellow dive bags were attached. We did not know how heavy this canoe is. Estimates said it could be from 200 pounds to 1,000 pounds. And so we planned for it to be very heavy. Turned out it's only 260 pounds, but these dive bags can pull up a car. And so it was easy. The 4 dive bags brought it up quickly. And here you see the divers in the water. And you also see, I'm going to point out a videographer. One thing that Christian Overland said when we prepared to take this out, he said that this is going to be our Rosa Parks moment. I didn't even know what that meant, but he said that when he was the part of the Henry Ford Museum outside of Detroit, they had an opportunity to buy Rosa Parks Rosa Parks bus. And the whole society got involved, the whole museum got involved, and then it made international news. And he thought that this would be true as well. So just in case it was, he hired a videographer team that was in all of our meetings, watched us build the vat. We're out during all the dredging, literally had 200 hours or more of video. They had drones. It's well recorded. So, you know, to his credit, I mean, I've been doing archaeology for a long time, and I said, well, you know, maybe it will be a big significant thing. And I really wasn't necessarily, I hoped it was true, but I just wanted to mention that, you know, maybe it's just not going to be that big of a deal, but let's see. And here's another shot. What we did then was we towed it 4 feet below the surface. So the dive bags are holding it, suspending this sling that had a canoe in it. And the canoe is 4 feet below the surface of the water. And then we're going to tow it to Spring Harbor Beach, which is about 3/4 of a mile away. Little did we know, we had to change our plan that morning, because on November 1st, unbeknownst to us, the Dane County lowered Lake Mendota by 2 or 3 feet to get ready for winter. The boat launch where we were going to pull up the canoe was the water was so shallow that we couldn't even get our boat in there. So we quickly changed our plan, moved it to Spring Harbor, but that turned out to work fine. The only problem was, as we pulled the canoe underwater, even though we were going like walking speed, it kept twisting and turning, and I was afraid it was going to drop in. We kept going in and making adjustments. We put a diver on it to hold it steady, and it did make it safely to Spring Harbor. And this is the moment that the canoe first popped out of the water. We walked it the rest, because the water was very shallow. We walked it about 100 yards in. And this is the first moment that I noticed that there were a lot of people on the shore. We had invited some press, like 3 or 4 different press outlets, and members of our own society were there, the Wisconsin Historical staff members. But there were probably about 100 people on the shore. And that's because it took us 4 hours to pull the canoe and bring it over to Spring Harbor. And there's a lot of houses there and people walking dogs. And then they asked what was going on, and they told them. And then with social media, so by 4 hours, there was 100 people there. And it was at this moment that I realized that Christian Overland was probably right, because people started to clap. And I'm not exaggerating when I say people were crying. It was a big deal. And so he turned out to be correct, thankfully, on that. And here you can see Christian Overland with Bill Quackenbush. Now, this was in the middle of the worst of the COVID. And so we didn't do as much direct collaboration with the Ho Chunk or other tribal partners except to keep them informed. But as you'll find out in a second, we've had a do-over and they're much more involved. But Bill Quackenbush and the Ho-Chunk, especially, and all the tribal partners have played a big role in this. And within 24 hours, there had been 800 stories around the world, in Australia and Japan, in The Guardian in London. We were on CNN and other national broadcasts that night. Literally made a big splash. So, and as Don mentioned, it was voted eventually one of the top 10 archaeological discoveries in the world in 2021, which is sort of amazing. We anticipated it would be very heavy. It turned out it wasn't that heavy. We built the vat and we built the system in order to lower it down with a forklift. Turns out we could lower it down just by hand. And I want to point out an individual here. This is Tammy Thompson. This is a member of the dive team, the DNR. And this is Scott Roller, who's the collection manager at the State Archival Preservation Facility. Because after we got it out of the water, we put it on a DNR trailer, and with a police escort. What happened spontaneously, by the way, because the mayor of Madison ended up coming down because she heard about this. And then somebody said, "Do you want a police escort?" And we said, "Sure," which I appreciated because the Madison roads are awfully bumpy and I didn't want it to break up. And so this is the vat that we're lowering it down into. And Christian Overland said, whatever it takes, you need to get this done. And, you can hire people to do stuff. So I thought, great. We knew we had to build a waterproof vat to store and preserve the canoe. But with 6 weeks to go, I called a bunch of carpenters. Nobody had the time to do it. So Scott Roller and I, based only on a picture, just built this thing. It turned out to be to work well, though, and not leak, which was their big concern. And then after a couple of months, we pulled it out and scanned it to get a 3D scan and cleaned it, and then prepared it for the long-term, up to 3-year-long preservation process. It could stay in the water, it's purified water. Excuse me, it's purified water, and it could stay in there indefinitely and be fine. All the living things that would eat or destroy this wood are not in this water. It's being cycled through a pump that purifies the water, a UV filter. But we can't take it out again. So for 3 years, we have to base our work only on the scans. It turns out the scans turned out really cool. So this is what the first canoe looks like. I want to point out a couple of things. This is the end right here. About right here is what was sticking out of the water when Tammy first found it. And as you can see, it's a lot more degraded because it was exposed to the light. And then the inside of the canoe is blackened. And that's a clue also to that it was a dugout canoe, because the construction techniques without power tools for sure, but without metal tools even, was to burn the wood to cut the tree down, and then to burn the inside of the canoe and then bash it out with a maul. And so the charring remains. And this hole in it was a knot that popped out. And I think it was a design flaw, actually, because the canoe is about 3 or 4 inches thick everywhere, except right here when they were carving this knot, it got to about a 1/2 inch thick. And I think that maybe, too thin. And the knot popped out probably in the last 1,200 years after it was buried. I mentioned the film crew. This is the Purple Onion film crew out of Milwaukee, an Emmy Award-winning film crew. And and group, and they're great to work with, and we're continuing to work with them. And we got some visitors. First, let me introduce the team. We have Caitlin Zant, who's working for NOAA now in the Wisconsin Shipwreck Sanctuary. It's a great great position for her. We co-manage the sanctuary, so we're still working together. Amy Roseborough, of course, the First Lady, and Governor Evers, and then Tammy Thompson. We're in front of here. You see the vat. It's of our own design with the flying buttress technique. I'm proud of that. And I want to also mention, here's the vat here. It's a good view of the vat, lowered in the purified water. And then what's going to happen, we wanted to start it almost a year ago, but there's been supply chain problems with the chemical that is going to preserve the canoe. It's called polyethyl glycol, or PEG. And PEG is a tried and true method for preserving waterlogged wood. And because the only thing that's holding a piece of waterlogged wood together is the water inside the capsule, inside the cellular structure. And so PEG is added to the vat in water gradually, and it replaces the water in the cellular structure slowly over a couple-year process. When it reaches 40%, then we're going to ship it to Texas A&M when they have this really large freeze dryer, and freeze dry it for 2 weeks. We wanted to start this, but it's actually luckily we didn't, because as was said in the intro, we found another canoe. PEG is also the material that went into the Moderna COVID vaccines. It's in toothpaste, and I think we just got outbid by Moderna, and so we've been having a hard time getting PEG, but it's supposed to come shortly. In the meantime, Bill Quackenbush, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Ho-Chunk Nation, had been working for 3 years previous on building a dugout canoe by happy coincidence with his youth, with traditional techniques, and making a teaching and learning moment. But with a lot of things with the youth groups, it just was taking a long time. They had been working on it for several years, working at it for an hour or two here. And then Bill said, well, now that we found this dugout canoe, we got to finish this thing. So Bill finished it with a chainsaw. And as Bill says, if the Ho-Chunk would have had a chainsaw 1,200 years ago, they'd have used it. So he wanted to get it done. And because he wanted now to take the dugout canoe across Lake Mendota, visit the spot where the canoe was brought up, go down the Yahara River, and visit the State Archival Preservation Facility where the canoe is now being preserved, and then do a 5-day trip all the way down to Beloit, down the Rock River. And in June of this past summer, he did just that. And I'm glad that he did it, because it really, we all paddled along with him in kayaks and canoes, and it really went through the water well. You see, there's 3 people in this going along nicely. We, Tammy Thompson and Caitlin there joined Amy Roseborough and I in a canoe, and the dugout canoe, and the others that were in the party. And then we gave a little presentation, not that different than what I'm giving here, about the dugout canoe. Then we went through the Tinny Locks, if you know Madison, that connects the Lake Mendota and Lake Monona, and then visited the State Archival Preservation Facility. That was in June. In July of this past summer, I got a text from Tammy Thompson. I'm not kidding, I found another canoe. And knowing Tammy, I could tell you that I didn't trust her. Because she said, I'm not kidding, I thought, well, it's likely that means for sure she's kidding. I said, okay, send me a picture. She sent me a picture at the bottom of the lake. And again, here we are. We have another dugout canoe. And so I said, let's get a piece of it and we'll get it dated. And so we did, and it came out to be about 1000 BC. It's a 3,000-year-old canoe. Again, miraculous that any would survive this long. This one was not as intact as the first canoe, but it's 1,200 years older than the first canoe. But it's the same kind of style, same kind of manufacturing techniques, and same basic size. It came out, though, in many pieces, like 16 large pieces. We have them all, and we can put it back together if we want to at some point. But, you know, one thing we did, we thought the first canoe we found was a one-time deal, right? It was one of the greatest discoveries of the year in the world. And then the next summer, Tammy finds another one, doing the same thing, picking up trash and just having a recreational dive, but no doubt keeping an eye out for wood at the bottom. But this time we thought, let's, because this one was so fragile, we thought towing it behind the boat below the water was not a good idea. So we decided to pull it up the same way, but instead of dragging it underwater, we dragged it on a raft. And over the winter, the previous winter, when we found out about it, I told Tammy, well, I think we're going to find a lot more canoes, so I think I'll become a diver. Of course, just kidding. No, because the first canoe was the only canoe that an archaeologist had ever found in Wisconsin. And there's 70 known dugout canoes. The chances of finding another one were slim to none. But I became a diver anyway, and I'm glad I did, because it gave me a real appreciation for our dive team. This time we didn't wait until November when the water was clear. We decided to do it in the summer when it was just safer for the divers and not diving when it's 30 degrees. And so I was able to go down there. Well, the problem is the visibility was only about 1 foot. And when you start to excavate, the visibility is 0. And so I was impressed. I mean, it was basically done by feel. Luckily, it's only at 27 feet, so they can gather and come back up. But I got to witness this firsthand and have a real appreciation for the skill of the divers. And it turned out to be a good plan. And another thing we did is we involved the Ho-Chunk and Bill Quackenbush and the other tribal partners, but especially Bill, in the process right from the start. We told him immediately about it. He was in all our planning meetings. He participated in any way he wanted to. In this case, he said, I want to be on the water with other tribal members on a pontoon boat when it comes out. And they did indeed do that. And the wind came up, and they sailed kind of right next to us to block the wind as waves were going over the top. And we had divers hanging on to the raft, which is 2 queen-size mattresses, blow-up mattresses. This time I'm on the raft, in this case just with snorkels, but we had to talk a number of times, and I swallowed a few big gulps of Lake Mendota, and I'm here, still here today, so that's good. We pulled it out, and as you can see, it was a little less intact than the last one, 16 pieces. But here were the people that were in the dugout canoe, including Bill and the tribal chairman. This is Bill and his son helping us clean the canoe. This is one of the elders touching the canoe. And they were part of the whole day, and actually the days and weeks prior. We scanned this one again, and by happy coincidence, we had built the vat wide enough to hold 2 canoes. When Scott and I were planning this, the original plan was to own, because the first canoe was only 18 inches across, we thought, well, let's just make it 2 feet or 3 feet in size, so it takes less water and it's less heavy. But, you know, we didn't have a lot of good tools here, and so we decided just to make it the size of, based upon 4x8 sheets of plywood. And so it's 4 feet on the bottom, 4 feet on the side. Plenty of room for 2 canoes. And here you see both canoes. You can't really see them that well, but they're both in there. And this is actually between the 2 canoes. So, you know, it's almost room for a 3rd canoe. This is the canoe 1. This is canoe 2. And of course, the governor said, doggone, I want to come over and see it again. And he has one of the best reactions. He says, it gives me goosebumps to see this. And I would agree. And here's Bill Quackenbush also with the governor, First Lady. And here you can see our purification system now hooked up, kind of a Rube Goldberg thing. We have almost all the pieces for this one, except this chunk in the middle that is not to be found. And there are a couple of anchor scars on it as well. It's because it's a very popular fishing site. And over the years, some people have hooked into it accidentally. I'm talking to the county to try to maybe put a no anchor zone or something around here, because when there's 1 canoe and there's 2 canoes, there's probably more canoes. And so we have the first canoe and the second canoe at 1200 BC. And the last time Tammy and I were down there, just sort of checking out the site this past fall, we did a kind of a field survey, diving and feeling along, and we felt a lot more wood. And so there is a possibility that there are more canoes, which would be amazing. There's a funny story about the finding of canoe 2. We were or the site where possibly some other canoes were. Tammy said Tammy's a Hall of Fame diver and has dove thousands and thousands of times. This was my 8th dive. So we both go down. She said, just stay with me. But I was sort of, you know, this is Tammy's version of the story. And then I'm going to tell you the story that went into the report. I'm sort of equalizing, and, you know, I'm a novice. And so I drifted away from Tammy. And she did this thing that, you know, which is she turned on her light, and I'm down at the bottom. She's at the bottom. And when she turned on her light, it meant you should just swim over to me. And then, you know, but I was still sort of getting my act together and flopping around. It's like being a giraffe, a baby giraffe. And finally, she comes over and sees me and goes like that. Like, what are you doing? But lo and behold, all my flopping around and exposed some more wood, maybe more canoes. So we decided to stop recovering anything and to look at the site more carefully. And this is an image of the Lake Mendota. The canoes were found about right here. And the greenish dots, lime green dots, are villages, and the ones with a diamond in them are effigy mounds. So this date to 1,200 years ago. So we have lots of villages and mound sites around Lake Mendota. And the 1000 BC, basically the late Archaic, and these are late Archaic sites around Lake Mendota, quite a few of them. And it also is interesting that all of Lake Mendota has this long bench and then a big drop off. They call it the wall. You can especially see it on top here, the wall. And that's where the canoes are being found, on this wall. And there has been some reconstructions of the lake levels. And we do know at 1000 BC, the lakes were 20 feet lower than they are today. which puts you right on the top of this wall. So, and then we also know with the 4 lakes, and Lake Mendota has a very small watershed, and that there hasn't been very good reconstructions going forward into more recent times, but it's likely that the lakes would have fluctuated a great deal as well. And we're going to do some study now to try to figure that out. So this is an image that Amy Roseborough created, just to sort of give you a feel. Lake Mendota was artificially raised by 5 feet, 100 years ago. So, but this is the original water level at, in 1850. And then this would have been the water level at 1000 BC. And I think also at probably maybe for 5 years of drought, the water would come down. And this is where we're finding the canoes, on this wall. And they were buried probably up here. And the geologists would tell us that logs or wood or canoes, if buried, would travel down slowly down underground on an incline like this. So for whatever reason, they're coming out and starting to become exposed, and we're starting to see them. So our next step is to do some ground penetrating radar. And we did 2 sessions of it this past winter on the ice. And this is Bill Quackenbush again, by happy coincidence, Bill Quackenbush and the tribe have a ground penetrating radar device, and he's an expert technician. And ground penetrating radar goes through the snow. Well, it's normally used on flat land, and it searches for anomalies. It sends down signals that bounce back. And if there's anomalies like rocks or walls or any kind of disturbance, it'll pick it up, or logs or canoes. But in this case, we were going through the water, through the ice and through the water into the sediment below. Bill had never done that. And so for those of you who live south, and you probably had this north too, there was one day that we did it in February where it was below 0 on that day. And we all have busy schedules, and this was the day we had planned far in advance, and so we went for it. So on that day, we figured out that we could do it, that anomalies were being seen. And then just a couple of weeks ago, we went back out again and more systematically did transects over the canoe area to not only search for other canoes, but also perhaps for a habitation site that would have been, with the water being lower, that would have been on the bench that's now under 10 feet of water or so. Those data are still being processed, and I'm anxious to see how that's going, how that'll go. So that's the next thing that we'll find out. And what we do find, we can then ground truth in the spring by diving. And I should also mention Bill Quackenbush and I have given 2 talks like this together. It's a slightly different talk, but still a lot of the same information that I provided tonight. And we're giving 2 more talks here in the next 4 weeks. So the collaboration continues, and I'm excited about that. And here you can see the crew. This is Larry, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer from Bad River, way north. Tammy Thompson, Jordan, another one of our maritime archaeologists now. Ian from the Ho-Chunk, Amy Roseborough, Bill Quackenbush, and this is Miranda, who's Menominee and a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. So that was our crew that day, the brave ones. And I bought a fishing igloo so we wouldn't die out there because it was so cold. So anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. It was very interesting. We got a few questions. I'm sure some people will chime in here. So do we know what kind of wood was used in these canoes?
You know, I was going to highlight that given you are Forestry Association, but I forgot. But the canoe number 1 is white oak. And think about that if you're a woodworker, how hard it would be to shape without power tools white oak. And the second one, we on the first go around, it was identified as elm. And so another hardwood, but we're going to try again because the consistency of canoe 2 is like thick, wet cardboard, and it's hard to get a good piece that shows the cellular structure. Tammy Thompson and Cecil Schrader, Dr. Schrader from the University of Wisconsin, Madison Anthropology Department, have been doing this statewide survey, and they found that oak, elm, pine, beech, and those are the primary ones that as we continue to do wood analysis. They're going to be dating carbon-14 dating all these 70 canoes and getting wood analysis. And also should point out, the canoes are kind of flat. The older ones turned out are pretty flat. They're more like paddle boards. And as time goes on, they start to look like what we'd call a more standard modern canoe with sidewalls. So there does seem to be some chronological change, and hopefully once we maybe we'll see some stylistic change across regions.
Yeah, one of our logging enthusiasts made a comment about pines that were floated down rivers, floating better, but evidently that they had enough hardwood that they were able to. And I had a question to add to that. So when Mr. Quackenbush built the canoe, what kind of wood did he use?
That was basswood.
It's easy to work with, that's for sure.
Yeah. And, I choose that too, pine. But you know what? There's 2 kinds of canoes basically in Wisconsin. There's dugout canoes, and then there's birch bark canoes. Birch bark canoes get all the press. But the benefit of birch bark canoes is they're light and portable if you had to portage. They're terrible and have terrible durability. They had to be repaired constantly while in use. And so the other extreme then is to build yourself a birch bark canoe, which probably would last your lifetime, or build a dugout canoe out of hardwood that would last you a lifetime. And we did some estimates of how much weight our canoe can handle. It's about almost 300 pounds. So it's a couple people, some fish, some cargo. And it's like an old pickup truck, you could bang it into rocks and drag it up on the shore, and you're not going to hurt it. So I think the durability issue, and after I saw it going through the water, the one that Bill made, I was like, wow, it goes just as good as our canoes that we're paddling along.
So the bench where the canoes were found were areas of habitation. Is that correct? Was another question here from Leslie.
There's habitation sites on the ridge. It's a huge sort of ridge where the canoes were found, and a bluff, I should say. There's sites on top of that bluff. My thinking is if the water was much lower, there might be villages on the bench. That hasn't been determined yet, but there's villages on the bluff.
So I just have to say hi to Leslie. She's a good friend of mine. So hi, Leslie. Nice to have you on the webinar. So I was wondering, have you figured out why they're so light? What changed in the wood physically? Because normally a hardwood would be pretty heavy.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we don't know what the wood would have weighed. I mean, a big chunk of white oak is very heavy, but it's not 260 pounds, but it's waterlogged. So it's hard to know what it would have weighed without the water. Maybe we can figure that out as the water is removed and the peg is, we can calculate what the weight was. It would have been, if anybody's, you're all forestry people, you pick up 15-foot white oak, 4-inch thick log. It's a monster, right? So, but I don't think, they didn't portage these. They put them in the water and then dragged them up, buried them for the winter, and it's ready to go in the spring.
Someone was wondering exactly what the net anchors, how they were attached and how they were used specifically.
Yeah, I have some illustration and I could have, but let's just say that's a net sinker. They're notched right here. They're notched right here. And then twine or rope or cordage is tied across here. And then they hold the net on the bottom.
Gotcha. Rumor I have heard is that jet skis may have played a role in removing some of the sediment above the canoes to expose them. Any validity to why they were being exposed now?
I don't know. There's two possibilities. I mean, Tammy's been diving at this site for 30 years. And this happens in archaeology a lot. And let's just say there were always been a canoe exposed there. But if you're not looking for a canoe, or you don't recognize it as a canoe, you just think it's a piece of wood, you just don't even think about it. So it may have been the coincidence that she had been doing this canoe study where she stopped picking up garbage and uncovered it. The other possibility, or both of these could be in act, is that as they move down this wall, they're getting close to the bottom. Some are actually right near the bottom, that boat activity has caused some erosion. Not just jet skis. I think more so than jet skis are these boats that do wakeboarding, where they put their motors way down and they cause this enormous wave. And in the Northwoods, I mean, they're having trouble with these kind of wakeboarder and these big boats destroying the vegetation on the bottom. So it certainly causes a stir. And there's another thing that we don't understand. There was a couple of days that I was down there where there was a current, a significant current, where you had to hang on or you would drift away. So I don't know why they're being exposed now for sure. Maybe we'll figure that out. Maybe we won't. But it's interesting that they are now exposed, I think.
So we have a question about the cost of this operation. Did the Historical Society cover all the cost? And, have you kind of tabulated that?
Yeah, we've got some real good bean counters at the Wisconsin Historical Society, and they've estimated that's going to cost $100,000 to take this canoe from preservation. The peg itself costs $7,000. This is not including any labor, of course. And then to build an exhibit, I mean, we have a new history center. The Wisconsin Historical Society's museum is now closed. In 2027, a new one will appear on Capitol Square. And the canoes have already been chosen as the one of the large objects that are going to be displayed and the story that's going to be told. And because I think canoes are perhaps the most unique artifact in North America. And one of the themes of our new Wisconsin Historical Society will be water, the rivers and Great Lakes, and, because those were the transportation systems early on. But also, if you take a Native American, if we had a time machine and a Native American from 10,000 years ago could come to Madison, they wouldn't recognize a thing. They wouldn't recognize the landscapes, the building and automobiles, the tools, nothing. But if you took them down to Lake Mendota, they'd recognize the water, and they would recognize somebody paddling a boat, a canoe. And they, not only that, they could jump in the canoe and know how to run it. That makes it, I think, the most interesting artifact in my mind. I'm biased, I'm an archaeologist, but one of the most interesting artifacts that continues to this day.
Okay, we had a couple of people drop it into the Q&A just to keep me on my toes here. So Ed is wondering, has the Forest Products Lab been involved in investigating the changes in the wood over the years? I think that's more of a suggestion than anything, but.
The people from Forest Products have been unbelievably good. They've been involved from the beginning and volunteer their time and have been doing all the wood identifications for us.
Okay.
So to that, we're grateful. And we have also, there's a person at the University of Wisconsin in Platteville, Evan Larson, who studies tree rings and does dendrochronology, tries to reconstruct climate from the tree rings. And he has come and looked at our canoes and has gotten good tree rings patterns from them, because it would be really cool. I mean, he can take tree rings back from old stumps, you know, to I think to 1200, I think, or so. Maybe no, 1600. And then there's this gap, and then we have a 1200-year-old canoe. And he's hoping to close this gap so he can have a climate pattern going back in time, which would be really cool.
Yeah. Do we think the builders seasoned the wood before they worked it with fire and scraping pools? Do we think they ever treated the wood with pitches or resins, naturally occurring petroleum products?
I don't know the last part of that question. There's no evidence of that, and that was never done sort of ethnohistorically when people have watched people make dugout canoes. We do know fire was involved in both cutting the tree down and in forming and hollowing out the inside of the canoe.
And the pitches would have been used on the birch bark canoes too.
Right.
I got another one here over. A lot of comments about the presentation. Everybody found it interesting and enjoyable. Lots of thank yous. Don, am I missing anything?
You are not.
All right. A little note about next month's presentation.
Next month, we're going to have Al Gertner. He's a local historian in the central Wisconsin area, talking about logging operations and lumbermen along the southwestern Marathon County and northeastern Clark County boundaries. So it should be an interesting presentation with a lot of pictures about some of the small areas, or small towns, and some of them are ghost towns now in central Wisconsin. Hope you all can join us. I'd like to say thank you to Dr. Skibo for the presentation. It was a great presentation, and I look forward to the sequel when you can tell us about the other canoes that you find in the next couple of years. The people who are participating tonight will receive a brief survey to complete after the webinar shuts down. We'd appreciate if you give a little thought to the questions and answer them. We'll use that feedback for planning future webinars, so we really do appreciate it. And again, unless Tom has something else, Tom is good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Skibo, and thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next month.
Very nice.
Thank you.